Months after the release of Sekiro and more playthroughs deep than I can count, I'm finally ready to submit my love letter to this masterpiece. If you haven't already, after the video, give a look to my 10 things I hate Sekiro for what small criticisms I have to offer, because today is geared at full speed toward only my adoration for everything I love about Sekiro. And since I like to rank everything I can get my hands on and it's been heavily requested, we'll wrap things up with where I think Sekiro stands among FromSoft's other works in the last decade, because Holy Moonlight Blade has it been good. But before that, at this rate, I'm gonna have to rank the top 10 times Raid Shadow Legends has sponsored this channel. Thanks to your continued support, I'm back again. In case you missed it, Raid is a brand new mobile RPG with 3D graphics that I still can't believe you can pull off on a phone, enormous boss battles, and with hundreds of champions to collect and customize, there's something to fit everyone's style. Playing it feels reminiscent of a classic RPG or strategy game of old, but in a fresh coat of paint. I'm having fun kicking some boss booty on my phone, and apparently so are 150,000 other people. The game's been blowing up fast, and the train shows no signs of slowing down with a huge update dropping this month. So what are you waiting for, an invitation? Because that's what this is. It's free! And when they bring around another tournament, you can fight me. And if you follow the link in the description below, you'll score 50,000 silver and a free epic champion to kickstart your adventure. Sponsors like these go a long way in supporting the channel, so thank you for listening. Back to Miyazaki's most recent masterpiece, let's wait no longer to dive into my adoration for it. Without further ado, here are the 20 things I love about Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Love number 1, the freedom of movement. Look, it's no secret that I have an affinity for sprinting past everything in existence as fast as I can to simulate my own boss rush, so of course I'm a fan of unlimited sprint. But it goes far beyond that. The freedom of movement gives exploration a rush that I've waited eons for FromSoft to deliver. Even the ability to jump in place is something that makes me feel like shouting praise in their direction. I understand why some games need to restrict movement, but growing up on platformers like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, and Mario often makes those experiences feel like my feet are stuck in arbitrary quicksand. You know why Halo is one of my favorite shooters ever made? It's not the gripping story, creative weaponry, or revolutionary level design. No, it's because I got goddamn moon shoes. Of course, this isn't a blanket application. Not that I was exactly Call of Duty's #1 fan in the first place, but I couldn't help but audibly laugh when I saw soldiers flying around like jetpack boosted wombats in whichever yearly Cash Pinata shit that out. To relate to FromSoft's previous work, the level design of Dark Souls is deeply ingrained in a controlled IV drip of world discovery that is metered by various enemy configurations. Allowing the player to jump might allow them to avoid taking their daily dose of punishment, and we can't have that now, can we? It would also allow the player to skip dramatic amounts of content that really shouldn't be missed. But in Sekiro, they've kept their method of making bosses mandatory markers of progression while allowing more flexibility in the way you move through the world. The possibilities for strategy, traversal, and exploration are taken into another dimension with the addition of the grappling hook. The ability to sprint forever allows you to dash through a level at risk of missing out on upgrades for your gourd, skill points from enemies, and the wonderful detail they put into the world. All this expands player choice though, which in my mind is rarely a bad thing. They even somehow managed to craft their world in a way that I was almost never lost, even though I was flying around rooftops and caverns at a blazing pace. And if you are someone that likes to fully explore every nook and cranny of a level, you've got more ways than ever to reach them. Because of course, the freedom of movement isn't only related to the speed that it offers. Love number 2, the stealth. In FromSoft's previous works, it's always been possible to approach some things in stealth if you're clever and patient, but Sekiro has a fully realized stealth component. Simply crouch in and out of wildly placed tall grass, or prowl the rooftops above a foe, or stalk enemies from the grip of below their doom. They built in so many different ways to remain undetected with the movements. With Sekiro's combat largely being based around a one-on-one squared up system, handling crowds is often best done by picking them off strategically, then running in swords blazing. This is at its peak when you're able to instantly stealth blow a target or shave a health bar off a mini-boss before the encounter even begins. Admittedly, it's not perfect. The stealth can be overly forgiving due to the freedom of movement allowing you a nearly unlimited escape route, but it's balanced well by the high learning curve associated with direct combat. They even found clever ways to reward your patience in stealth, such as my number 3 love, eavesdropping. This is a brilliant method of information delivery for those willing to seek it out. I would even say that this is their replacement for the message system in Dark Souls, as it provides useful tips in an immersive way. For example, if you listen to the soldiers right before the chained ogre, they'll tell you of its fear of fire. Just before this, you got a bell to explore a new area that houses such an item. There are many instances of this all over the game, and though I may not love some of the NPC quests being tied to eavesdropping at the right time, it's a great reward for those who are more observant. But let's not glaze over the flame vent or any of its brethren associated to love number 4, the prosthetic arm. From the very first trailer, the prosthetic arm has been a centerpiece of Sekiro's branding. Finding out the significance of it was to create a jack-of-all-trades tool that would be built into every character was an intriguing concept. Rather than tweak their game for different builds to succeed, they could focus on delivering an experience that would assume you would get access to all the tools in some capacity. And while the firecrackers are the king of universal utility, there are situations where all the shinobi tools shine. The flame vent makes short work of red-eye enemies. The finger whistle can be upgraded to be the demon of hatred's kryptonite. The axe will shatter the shields of enemies and even the hats of those pesky dwarves. The shield can suck the parasite out of guardian ape for massive posture damage. The umbrella can be upgraded to make terror a non-factor. The shuriken finally gives me the upper hand on dogs in a FromSoft game. The fan can turn enemies around for death blows mid-combat or spirit monks away in a single shot. The Sabimaru is effective against some of the most annoying enemies in the game. And the Miss Raven's feathers are a free dodge, which is always handy. They're fun to try out, even if smacking things with your sword is often the best way to handle things. Love number 5, the rhythmic swordplay. It took me a while to realize it when playing, but my click moment came in understanding how Sekiro's combat flows. You approach enemy, you attack enemy, once they deflect you, that's your cue to begin deflecting, and once their attack is complete, rinse and repeat. It's a rhythm game disguised behind the clash of samurai swords, and that natural cadence that varies from enemy to enemy feels incredible to master. Of course, it's not all there is to combat. Love number 6, perilous attacks. While I do thoroughly enjoy moving to the beat, it would quickly become stale without something to keep you on your toes. Enter perilous attacks, unblockable moves that either force a counter, dodge, jump, or retreat. With how easy it can be to get lulled into a trance through the attack and deflect dance, these are brilliant punishments for not staying vigilant. I have chastised grabs for not having a direct counter similar to the Mikiri or Goomba slam, but you can still step counter and smack dab booty. No matter how you handle them, they serve a distinct purpose and add needed depth to the fast-paced combat system. This system being capped off by my number 7 love, the posture mechanic. FromSoft's dual-layered approach to hit points is the final ingredient that flips the combat from excellent to masterpiece for me. In many games, including their own work, enemies are defeated by HP alone. There are, of course, other mechanics involved in most of these encounters, but it's not as if the same isn't true for Sekiro. On top of them, you have 2 strategic choices. Slice through your enemy's HP by finding complete openings in their defense, or attack aggressively to stack their posture. There's an immersive truth to the idea that an enemy, no matter how strong, will eventually have their defenses broken by a ferocious assault in a burst. To build on it, the more you damage their vitality, the harder it is for them to recover their posture. It creates a balance between looking for openings that let you keep your hard-earned posture damage and keeping the pressure on with your attacks even if they're blocked to keep that posture up. Whether you deplete their vitality or maximize their posture, you'll eventually get a killing blow to finish the job, but you'll be rewarded by it early in a sense if you're aggressive enough. When you mix that strategic balance in with the perilous attacks to keep you honest and the elegant dance that is Sekiro's exhilarating combat, it creates a combat system that is one of the best I've experienced in recent memory. This is never on display more than in battles against my number 8 love, the bosses. I won't spend too long on this since I've talked about this topic on length on the channel already, but I think as evidenced by the scoring in the community ranking, Sekiro's bosses on average are some of FromSoft's finest overall work in a single game, with some of them being standouts to rival their best. What I haven't talked about at length is how much I love posture, health, and attack upgrades being a reward for defeating them and their mini-boss counterparts. I'm not gonna pretend that this would work for every game, but with how heavily bosses are baked into the progression of FromSoft titles, it makes a ton of sense for them to be your barriers to upgrades, at least for a fast-paced action title. If this was an RPG, I'd argue that the loss of flexibility in how to upgrade your character stats is a net loss. But here it matches the freedom of movement that allows you to skip around the content or even skip some of it altogether. At your own peril, of course. If you don't explore enough to find prayer beads in the world or for mini-bosses, you handicap yourself against the bosses. And if you try to explore heavily without taking on the bosses, you might have trouble taking down certain foes. You're rewarded for fully exploring, and yet you have the option not to do it once you maximize your path through the game to focus on the aspects you enjoy playing. There's also something extremely satisfying added to the thrill of beating a boss knowing it will permanently improve your damage for the remainder of your experience. And I love slaying mini-bosses as a path to more bitch vitality. I'm trying to remain even the slightest bit objective and analyze the purpose here, but the truth is that I love fighting bosses, and making it so that I can solely focus on them in subsequent runs without losing any major progression makes me swoon. Of course, not all is lost if you want some customization, because it comes in the form of my number 10 love, skill trees. They're 5 different trees in the game that all offer passive upgrades and powerful moves to make Sekiro a master shinobi. Some are geared toward those who like to use prosthetics, others let you fight like a classic samurai, and you can even learn the way of the fist from the monks. It's subtle and not nearly the level of customization you would hope for in an RPG, but it all centers around making Sekiro more effective in combat, which is the heart of Sekiro's appeal. These trees are fueled by skill points, which gives you an incentive to fight basic enemies throughout your journey. Succumb to them though, and you'll be subject to my 11th love, death, or at least the punishment for it. Deaths in Sekiro can be painful. Losing half of your money is a gut punch, and half of your XP as well as kicking you while you're down. At least they decided to be merciful enough to make it only half your XP toward your next skill level, with any fully earned being safe. You can get a pass on the penalty entirely through unseen aid, which is affected by dragon rot's presence in the world. The less dragon rot, the higher chance you'll get a free pass upon death. This adds another wrinkle to the value of dragon droplets. Beyond them, losing your money adds value to the coin purses you find throughout the world. In particular, I found it valuable to buy them from merchants before a boss battle. Sure, you have to pay a small markup, but it's better than losing it all in defeat. You can of course avoid that all by not dying, which is easier than ever thanks to the resurrection system, my number 12 love. While the penalty for death can be harsh, you do at least get one free pass every time you die in the form of resurrection. When it boils down to it, resurrecting is really a more forgiving heal that gives you an extra chance if you make a grave error. It's a solid bit of forgiveness when you consider the dramatic amount of damage some bosses can deal. I'm also a big fan of how healing works in the game. Beyond resurrecting, you have up to 10 gourd charges. They're effectively the same thing as Estus from Dark Souls 1. Find a seed and get more gourd, though the effectiveness of their healing is improved through passive skills that are mostly obtained from key mini bosses, which is yet again another way to praise how bosses set your progression, but I've harped on that enough. Pellets are what life gems should have been, a restricted quantity health assist. It's nice to have a handful of items that can help in a pinch, but too much healing wouldn't work well, especially in a game where you can sprint for your life to get to safety in most instances. Altogether, your gourd, the few healing items available to you, and resurrections feel well balanced to get you through the world of Sekiro while keeping the difficulty we've come to expect from FromSoft. But if you want to lower that difficulty a bit, I strongly encourage you to use my number 14 love, universal buffs. In tandem with everything that has been streamlined to accelerate the game's pace, most buffs are as simple as more damage to everything or more defense against everything. This does cause a loss of complexity in different combinations and defenses against certain bosses and enemies, but it works in a more action-focused setting. And as mentioned, there are plenty of prosthetic tools that can exploit certain situations if you know how to make the most of your arsenal. Right alongside the universal buffs, it's hard not to mention my love for agents. They combine a temporary resistance buff with the removal of a status buildup of things such as terror or fire. It's such a simple tweak, but another thing that streamlines things. Personally, I'd love to see these combined more in the future so you don't have to spam a million buffs prior to a fight if you want to maximize your resistances. When you add in all these items, buffs, prosthetics, attack versus deflect, etc., it gives you a lot of flexibility in the style you play the game. This leads me to my 16th love, the joy of experimentation. In the absence of builds to provide variety, you're left to be as creative as you want with the kit they gave to every single player in Sekiro. With the prosthetics, I talked about how each has a use, but honestly, I have no idea if there are more situations where some excel. I wouldn't be shocked if some boss has a huge weakness to a prosthetic that very few, if any, players are aware of yet. And the real joy of the experimentation is that it's all optional. By min-maxing for each situation, you get the most out of it, but you can still get by with your sword alone if you want to. And for those who love to experiment, there's loads of combinations to try. For example, I don't think the axe is something most people would recommend for Ishin the Sword Saint, but I used it to great success by pairing it with Uno Sugar so I could tank hits and destroy his posture. Sure, it's not the most effective way to win, but it worked for me and I had a blast doing it. No, it's not the same as creating a character from scratch to fill a completely different role, but there's something to be said about not having to do anything over again and having all the customization at the ready. It might not work as well in a deep RPG, but it's perfect for one that leans its emphasis on action. Something that was also quite different that longtime FromSoft fans seem mixed on was the music, but I love the difference. In many cases it was more subdued, but that helped match the setting. I wouldn't go as far to say that I'll be firing up the soundtrack regularly in reverence of its greatness, but it fills its role well most of the time and excels in a few cases such as with Ishin, Emma, and the Divine Dragon. Being understated doesn't mean it can't be great, even if it doesn't reach the past heights of Yuka Kitamura's work on Dark Souls and Bloodborne. Personally, I still think it's worth celebrating. But if the soundtrack didn't do it for you, maybe the over-the-top voice acting was more to your taste. Wu Guy, Roberto, and Gyobu. All these things add a perhaps unintended levity to a heavy world that could use a moment of humor here and there. It's not as if the voice acting isn't phenomenal when it comes to the tense cutscenes and major story beats, so I love all the moments where it gets seriously wacky. But let's give the charming rich NPCs their due. Overall, I feel Sekiro is lacking in a world full of rich NPCs, but the ones they did choose to put a heavy emphasis on have some excellent stories to tell. I'm a bit sad that they're all locked behind sharing sake and not doing something more gameplay intensive, but FromSoft has always kind of dumped exposition on your head whenever it comes to encountering someone anyway. The sake-fueled interactions are very appropriate for the setting, and even though they may lack the action the rest of the game oozes, they can be plenty full of emotional tension. Many of their stories also have gameplay payoffs depending on the path you go down, and they also enrich the main narrative in a big way. If you've never passed a sake around, I'd recommend it. Sorry to say though that I don't have a clever segue for my final love, but maybe that's appropriate considering the subject matter. Love number 20, the bait and switch of Sekiro. I can't be the only one that expected to do well in Sekiro thanks to my experience in Souls, only to be rudely awakened to the fact I was like a newborn in a new world. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty damn maddening at first, but slowly I started to realize I was playing the game in a way that worked in an entirely different game. Even though FromSoft made both Souls and Sekiro, they crafted an entirely new game for us that may take inspiration, but provides a truly different experience from anything they've done in the last decade. And I love it. I got to experience the initial phase of getting good all over again from the moment I was awoken by the falling note from Emma to the journey's bitter end. I appreciate FromSoft's willingness to deviate in a moderate way from what made them so successful. From Miyazaki's recent interview, Elden Ring promises to do things that FromSoft could never do in Dark Souls. After Sekiro, I'm more excited than ever to see what they have in store for us. But in the meantime, allow me to deliver on my promise I made at the outset to give you a brief ranking of my favorite Souls titles as of right now. Number 7, Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin. Burn it. Burn it in the fiery pits of Old Iron King's Hole. To be succinct, for every improvement in Scholar, there are many more missteps that make it a subpar experience to the OG version. Number 6, Dark Souls 2. I love this game. Sometimes. I hate this game, sometimes. Without going into unending detail, it boils down to a lack of balance and quality control. There's too much bloat in this game. It's not often I can point at large sections of a game that would be better if removed entirely, but places like Reindeer Fuckland and Shrine of Amana will do that to you. Of course, that ignores the excellent levels and bosses in the game, of which there are plenty. I'm merely letting you know why Dark Souls 2 falls below its peers. It's a great game, but for me, it doesn't reach the same heights because the scope wasn't reined in to maximize quality. Number 5, Dark Souls 3. For me, Dark Souls 3 does one thing really well. Bosses. I think it's arguable that the bosses overall are the best in Dark Souls 3, even over Bloodborne and Sekiro. But everything else feels uninspired, from the level design to the heavy-handed fan service to the retreaded combat and a story I personally feel should have been left in ambiguity after the first Dark Souls. It just doesn't hit a lot of the same notes for me that the other games do. I love it for giving us bosses like Gale, Midir, Freed, and Pontiff, but I'd still prefer original titles like Bloodborne and Sekiro that fully let them flex their creativity over another Dark Souls game any day of the week. Number 4, Demon Souls. God, this game is janky, but somehow it works for me. There's so much charm in everything this game tries to do, even if some of it falls flat. The sprawling level design that builds, the creative boss battles from fantastic prototypes to failed experiments, the obtuse world tendency mechanic, farming for upgrade stones, the ethereal atmosphere, the broken healing system, the booty that is inventory load, it's all over the place. But it's grounded in the roots of what made the series a success, and this experimental first entry still shines in a way that makes it clear why Souls is revered the way it is today. Number 3, Dark Souls. This placement can be summarized as the first half being some of the best design FromSoft has ever created, but a second half that makes you wonder if it was created by the same people at all. From the moment Oscar tosses you the key to Ornstein and Smo is nearly perfect, but everything after that falls apart for me. Nito and his band of merry skeletons is anything but neat, the Tomb of the Giants can go fuck itself, and everything in Izalish should be in the developer's handbook for how not to drain fun directly from a player's soul. But none of that will ever erase the first half of the game and the phenomenal DLC. It really is the tale of two halves. I wish FromSoft had had more time to put the care they needed to in some of the later areas and bosses, because if they had, I would revere this classic more highly on the list. Number 2, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. I'm not 100% confident that years from now I'll hold Sekiro above Dark Souls. By every account, this action-focused game delivers on everything that I personally love in games, but it also sacrifices depth for that streamlined pace. For a first playthrough, this was a stellar experience that I'll remember for some time. But the question is, when that memory pulls me back to it years from now, will it hold up to the test of time that the other games in the franchise have? I'm not sure. But for now, it holds the title of my second favorite Souls-like game FromSoft has created in the modern era. And what comes as a surprise to I'm sure absolutely nobody, my number 1 favorite FromSoft game is Bloodborne. I love nearly everything about Miyazaki's gothic masterpiece. From the magnificent bosses to the near perfect level design in areas like Central Yharnam and Canehurst, the unforgettable DLC, the haunting soundtrack, the memorable characters, the engaging narrative, the beautiful visuals, I'll stop. We all know I love Bloodborne, but hey, I love Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Demon Souls, and Dark Souls as well. And of course, I love Sekiro. How about you? Do you love Sekiro, hate it, or somewhere in between? Let us know in the comments below. I've got 2 projects I've been working on for some time ready to launch in the next 2 weeks, so be sure to subscribe for all the latest updates. I want to thank y'all for watching today. Much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.